Right. Well, welcome. I see attendees are starting to join us. We'll give it just a moment as that number grows. But you are here in the afternoon session of the Missouri Second Annual Grade Level Reading Conference for 2021. And we will get started in about another minute.
It's so great to see so many friends.
Well, I know we have a full agenda, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'm sure we will see more join us. And for some of you, this is a welcome back if you were here with us this morning. But this afternoon, we are shifting topics. We had the pleasure this morning of hearing about the new Missouri Office of Childhood and the regional hub model that will be supporting many of the programming options in the state around early childhood care and education. And we are shifting focus this afternoon to another important topic that is impacting student success in a large way, both across our state and nationally. And that is attendance and how to ensure that we are overcoming chronic absenteeism and getting our students back to school in general, and very specifically this fall after such an unusual year. And we are, of course, very proud to be sharing this information as part of the larger national national grade level reading conference, and hope that you're able to take advantage of many of the other opportunities that are presented through that across this week. So why don't we shift forward in the slides. And we'll just talk through a bit of the housekeeping. Please join us in introducing yourself in the chat. Let us know who's here and what organization you're representing today. We will be recording the Zoom meeting, so you can expect that you will be able to receive a copy of the recording, and it will include all of the slideshows, the decks that are incorporated into it. It is a lot of information, so hopefully that will give you the brain space to just sit back and take it in today rather than trying to copy it all down. You will be muted throughout the presentation, so please feel free to use the Q&A section for sharing any questions. We will respond to some of those in writing, and given the time, we will bring important topics that you share with us through your questions up for discussion with our panelists. And beyond that, we hope that you will sit back and enjoy, and we will jump in with our first portion. We're going to start out today with some material shared by Elle Hogan, who is the Director of Community Engagement at Turn the Page KC. Elle is the Director of Community Engagement, where she directs the organization's communications initiatives, manages key collaborative partnerships, and oversees the implementation of the 2018-2022 Strategic Plan Community Engagement Tactics. Elle, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I'm excited to be here with everyone today, especially talking about attendance during this upcoming school year, which we all know is going to be a big year. And so what I'm going to talk about is what attendance campaign we're working on here in Kansas City for this upcoming school year. And we've kind of branded it Enroll, Engage, Attend. And I just wanted to highlight the reason why we've included enroll is because here in Kansas City, we've seen a decline in enrollment for the younger grades, particularly the pre-K and kindergarten grades. And so we really want to make sure that we highlighted enroll to families to stress the importance of getting back into school, enrolling to your school, and making sure that you're engaging with the school community, with the teachers, with the administration, and that your child is attending school every day. So you can go forward. So the Enroll, Engage, Attend. So the target audiences that we're focusing on with this campaign are families, school partners, teachers, administrators, also community partners, and those that we're calling attendance champions. So attendance champions are really those individuals that can help us drive home this message within our greater Kansas City community about the importance of strong student attendance. And what we're really hoping to create from this campaign is just a citywide culture of attendance, and that it is something that is reinforced in every level in the city, from the home to the school to after school and out of school time, to city officials who are really pushing for strong student attendance this year. So this year, more than ever before, there's a great need to enroll those students. We also know that absenteeism in the first month of school can predict poor attendance throughout the school year. So that first month is really critical to engage students and to have those strategies in place to ensure that students are attending school regularly. And we want to highlight that poor student attendance can influence whether children read proficiently by the end of third grade. By sixth grade, chronic absence becomes a leading indicator that a student will drop out of high school. And also we want to highlight the positives of attendance, that when attendance improves when schools engage students and parents in positive ways. And we also just want to highlight that a student is a real critical part of their school community, and that, that's the main reason to have the child attend school every day, is that they are an active participant in this community. So you can go forward. Whenever we're doing a public awareness campaign, we want to ask the question, what do we want people to do as a result of these communications? So on the family level, we want families to have attendance plans at home. So that's thinking through things like, what is a good bedtime, and how can we get our kids to bed early and make sure that they start waking up on time for school? How can we ensure they have a healthy breakfast? What about transportation? Those types of questions. With school partners, we really want them to communicate the importance of strong student attendance, and we want them to involve students in ensuring that they have what's necessary to attend school every day. We also have found in our work here in Kansas City, and especially this has kind of been led by our student attendant consultant, Dr. Kia Turner, that she's worked with schools to create student attendance teams. So that is a team of various partners at the school level who can review attendance data and identify students who may be at risk for not attending school regularly. And then we want our community partners to be involved in promoting the importance of strong student attendance. And we also want them to ask themselves, what can we do to help drive home that attendance message? And we want those attendance champions to reinforce the importance of strong school attendance to the greater Kansas City community. So you can go forward. So families, as I said before, making those plans, we are going to reach families with flyers and infographics, press releases, and hopes to engage the media to drive home that message. We'll have videos as we did last year, which Tricia Johnson from the United Way is going to talk about later. School attendance tip sheets. We'll also be able to use our social media channels, so digital media, print, radio, and television to drive that home. And those will be the campaign channels for families. So you can move forward. So our call to action is for school partners is just the same thing that I talked about at the beginning, slides to help us communicate the urgency of strong school attendance to school families. We're going to have posters and flyers up. We'll also provide sample social media content. We are going to be doing a household mailer this year, which we're excited about. And we'll also be able to encourage them to use their school family communication systems, their social media channels, their mailers, and all for those events. It will be back to school nights will be important. Fingers crossed those back to school nights will happen in person this year. So for the next one. And then for our call to action for community partners is just to help us communicate the urgency. We're going to be distributing posters and flyers. We'll again have that social media toolkit, a PowerPoint template that those community partners can share with their own groups. We'll be using communication systems, our partners' websites. We'll be able to kind of distribute this information through Turn the Page KC's work group meetings. We have work groups for community engagement, school attendance, out of school time learning, and school readiness. And we're also going to partner with Show Me KC Schools that does regular school tours to help, where they'll be able to help us disseminate this information as well. So if you just go forward. So for our attendance champions, we just want us to, for those individuals in the Kansas City community who can use their platforms to really drive home that message of strong student attendance. We want them to help us identify barriers that keep children from attending school. We also, as I'm sure Hedy will talk about this one in her section, but we know that incentives are very effective. And so we want to work with those community partners to come up with incentives. We've talked about tickets to sporting events, or maybe even partnering with local restaurants to do like we had when I was growing up with the Book It. You know, if you read so many books, you get a personal pan pizza. Well, if you have strong student attendance within that first month of school, you can take a coupon in to get a pizza at Minsky's, which is a local restaurant here. But we also want to use channels like an op-ed and social media posts where those voices can have a larger platform to drive home that message. So now I will turn it over back to Kristen, who will introduce Tricia.
Thank you. And why don't we just pause for a moment if there are any specific questions for Elle on the work that she has shared. Is anything popping up in the Q&A, Lisa?
Not yet. I wanted to know from Elle, where's the footprint for all of this work that you're doing? What school districts is your footprint in?
We work with Kansas City Public Schools and as well as charter schools here in Kansas City. I think Tricia will talk a little bit more about the footprint in her section, so I'll let her answer that too.
Great, thank you. So we're going to shift now, and I'm very happy to introduce Tricia Johnson. Tricia founded another nonprofit, Show Me KC Schools, in 2013 to help parents find the right information and a right school for their child in Kansas City. But more recently, in 2020, Tricia joined United Way of Greater Kansas City as the Director of Education Initiatives.
Thank you, Kristen. Good afternoon. It is such a great opportunity to be here and share a little bit about last year's student attendance campaign in Kansas City. So one of the highlights of my work at United Way of Greater Kansas City is our strong partnerships. So last summer, when we were all trying to keep up with the ever-changing back to school plans and guidance about how to count student attendance in schools, embarking on a student attendance awareness campaign would have seemed overwhelming if United Way wasn't a part of a really great team, which includes my local colleagues from Turn the Page KC and School Smart KC, and our education attendance consultant, Dr. Kia Turner, in addition to the support and guidance we receive from AttendanceWorks. So as a Kansas City team, We agreed that after a pretty rough spring in 2020, rallying our community around a strong student attendance campaign was more important than ever, even if attendance and engagement looked a little different at every school, which it did. So we tried creating an encouraging and inclusive campaign theme that spoke to all families and students. And so that's how we created Learning Together Every Day. So next slide. And recognizing that many schools were starting the year virtually, we really leaned into our videos. We created a video for parents of virtual learners, sharing tactics and ideas to support engagement. And we created a parent for students returning to school, into school buildings, and emphasizing the importance of strong student attendance. But we also tried to normalize that going back to school would include masks and plexiglass. So we're going to share this 90-second version of that video with you now.
We are all learning together every day how to navigate new challenges and adapt to changing circumstances. School will look different for many students. Some learning in classrooms, some at home, and some from both places. It may be easy for students to lose interest, but it's more important than ever to attend school every day. Regular attendance sets your child up for success throughout their entire life.
Attendance is important now because we want to get them back on track and we want to get them where they need to be for this school year. We also want students to make sure that they are getting those connections. So student-to-student connection, student-to-teacher connection. They've been home for a long time, so we want them to make connections with the kids in their community as well.
By encouraging your child to be persistent and committed to learning every day, despite potential changes in how or where they learn, you are setting the foundation for their future success. While this is a challenging moment in time for all of us, our children's future success depends on us taking action now, partnering with our teachers and schools to make sure our children are present, engaged, and learning together every day.
Thank you, Lisa. So we are just so grateful to Kansas City PBS for running these videos, as well as our local Kansas City channel 2. So we shared them on websites, social media platforms, and we sent these videos to schools and suggesting that they share them at back to school nights. And Attendance Works actually encouraged us not just to send schools a link to the videos, but to include a simple parent-focused activity to accompany these videos, which would allow teachers to see how they can utilize these videos with parents and actually turn them into a peer learning and sharing opportunity around the importance of student attendance. So next slide. No problem. So we'll just say, so in addition to these videos, we also emailed a toolkit to all of the school districts in United Way's 6-county footprint. And so on the next slide, you'll see that we have actually 52 school districts that we sent these to. It's 32 school districts and 20 charters. And we shared top 10 tips on how to support virtual learning. We shared educational resources for families, such as free online tutoring sites. We shared a PowerPoint on the importance of student attendance, social media posts, and an offer to personally deliver bookmarks with encouraging student messages to schools. Let's go to the next slide. I just want to emphasize again just how important having partners has been to share this information. So this is actually a screenshot of Turn the Page KC's site, which also houses the toolkit in addition to United Way's site. And in addition to sharing information with schools, we presented our toolkit to other community partners. We shared these family messages with 211 or resources. The Kansas City Public Library was a fantastic partner. They shared our message with several thousand individuals, particularly by sharing our bookmarks at their meal distribution sites. Let's go to the next slide. And so now we are eager to jump into our new campaign that Elle outlined. We are driven by a lot of the same energy and urgency from last year. making sure that students are back in their seats and maximizing every minute of school. We have, as Elle mentioned, we added another student attendance partner this year, one that specifically serves parents. So we're excited to broaden our reach. We're currently working on a new video. This one will include the voices of 2 superintendents and our mayor of Kansas City. We're sending out a household mailer that will go out early next week, stressing the urgency to get students enrolled today. And we know that communicating the importance of strong student attendance is a community effort. And so we are eager to get back out in front of our attendance champions and encourage them to share this unified message to enroll, engage, and attend. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tricia. Before we move forward for our next portion, are there any questions or thoughts that anyone would like to share specifically with Tricia?
I just thought I'd mention, Kristen, I just think the work that you've done is so spectacular, Trish, in a way of making these concepts easy to understand, making mask wearing, not a scary concept, but something, the pictures just so make it. I wondered, Trish, have you been able to make this available in other languages other than English?
That is such a great question. We've translated all of our materials into Spanish as well. And we do have a version of the video with Spanish subtitles. And actually, for anyone that's interested, there's a really great site that our videographers recommended to us. It's called rev.com. And they have multiple languages available, which you can, again, just pull subtitles. It's very inexpensive. It's easy to use. And it's actually very accurate as well. So I'll put it in the chat, rev.com.
Thank you. Thank you for that. All right, let's go ahead and move forward.
Oops, Kristen.
I noticed there's also another question in the chat. How long does it take to come up with a campaign?
Great question.
Yeah, again, just re-emphasizing that I think it would have been a more challenging experience if we were trying to do it by ourselves, but by working with Elle and again, partners at School Smart KC and Mike English, the former ED of Turn the Page KC, and Dr. Kia Turner, and then running ideas past Hedy, it was really fun to have it be a collaborative process. And even though it was via Zoom, it was still fun to be together and to brainstorm this. So Elle, I don't remember, Mike, do you remember it? It took a few days to kind of narrow it down. But again, we had lots of minds working on it, and different organizations took different leads with different pieces of the campaign.
Is that a hand up from Elle?
It looks like it.
I think I accidentally raised my hand. I was just going to reinforce what Tricia said, and she's given us a lot of credit. She's really been the leader in developing this. So yeah, it's just, it's been a group effort. And, I think that sense of urgency has made us move a little bit faster than we normally would in a traditional year. So, so that's been helpful.
I really appreciated the focus on making sure that children recognize and their families recognize that they're an integral part of their community at school, that it isn't just about their individual need, but that they are needed and wanted by their peers and by their teachers to make the community richer. So I think that gives it such an uplifting and positive focus. So thanks for that.
And thanks, Kristen. If I could just say one other thing as well. I mean, honestly, just having the abundance of resources on AttendanceWorks site to draw from and to utilize those talking points in our video. I think that's why Hedy likes them so much. they really just try to articulate, like, again, all the research that AttendanceWorks has done. So that was so helpful. Again, if we had to create these messages on our own, that would have been a lot more challenging, but we really did lean into the resources that are already out there. So thank you, AttendanceWorks, for having those available for us.
It is truly our pleasure. And I think we can go to the next slide. One of the things I wanted to say about AttendanceWorks And actually, you know what though? I'm just, Kristen, I'm thinking, so I'm on here, but also from this question from Cynthia. Wonder if we could do that before we go to mine. Trish, so maybe we'll go back. Cynthia asked about what outcomes have you seen from last year's campaign and work? I wondered if you would respond to that before I talk about Attendance Works.
Yeah, I do think one of the challenges with marketing is sometimes, tracking outcomes, and because we really divided up the reach between United Way's website and School Smart's website and Turn the Page's website, we each got different amounts of views and traction with our videos. I think just one of the most positive, some of the most positive feedback we got was from the schools. And again, I think the schools were a little bit underwater last year, again, just trying to keep up with back to school plans. And so sharing these resources with them, seeing them on their social media accounts and hearing how they were able to share these with their parents was just really motivating for us to do this again. It's a challenging year for our schools. And so we really want to put the extra effort that we have as community partners into this for schools. So I wish I could say exactly how this may have impacted student attendance, but we just know that our schools, for the most part, were very grateful and vocal about how much they appreciated these resources.
You know what, Trish, I might also take the liberty of adding that in Kansas City, there's this broader attendance awareness effort, and there's also a more intensive effort with 3 school districts, really building the capacity of teams at the schools in those school districts to notice which kids are starting to be moderately, not just severely chronically absent. One of the challenges in Missouri and elsewhere is that we tend to not see attendance data till too late and not take early enough action. And this has been a 3-year effort, starting with Hickman Mills. And maybe, Trish, one of the things you could do, because the impact, like, are you reducing chronic absence, is less easy to capture from a marketing campaign where you might be able to know, well, how many people downloaded, how many people used, but you don't actually know, well, did it change outcomes for kids? It's easier when you're working in depth with a district and you can actually look at data on kids. Now, that has challenging during COVID, but we do have some information, and Trish presented this last on Monday, where she talked some, and in particularly in Hickman Mills with the partnership with Link, there was an ability to capture some outcomes, which really showed an ability to shift some of the outcomes for kids with a more personalized outreach. Now, the handouts, the resourcing with families is only a part of it. In some ways, that work precluded the campaign. But I think, Trish, that work that you all have done in partnership and deep work with districts is where you really are better able to track and look at outcomes moved over time. And I did think it was helpful for people here to be aware that you're working on both levels.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Hedy. That's a really great point. And I'm going to actually share a link to those findings and to the article in the chat, if that's all right.
Great. So I'll now keep going on with some information from Attendance Works. Maybe next slide, please. So first of all, I want to just encourage folks to come to our website, www.attendanceworks.org. What I will guarantee you is that you will have to take and tailor and make this your own. You can't, this isn't cookie cutter, but as Tricia said, maybe we can save you, having to reinvent about 70% of it, and the next 20 to 30%, you can make it your own. I also think you may be able to take a lot of what Trish and Turn the Page is doing and then take it and tailor and further tailor. And maybe now you only have to do 10%, adding your logo, or something like that so that people know it comes from you. Next slide. I wanted just to do a little bit of level setting. And so why don't you click pretty quickly through this. Improving attendance matters, and this is just a graphic that you can always use too, that because we know that chronic absence in pre-K and first can actually predict the inability to read on grade level in 3rd grade, and then by middle school it predicts lower achievement, by high school it predicts dropout. So it matters every period in a child's academic career. And next slide. And when we talk chronic absence, which is actually only a term that's about a decade old, we're meaning missing 10% or more of school for any reason. That's including excused, unexcused suspensions. Now, 10% of 180-day school year, which is sort of a typical school year, is actually just missing 2 days a month. So if you're using it as an early warning symptom, a trigger, you're noticing the kid who missed 2 days in the first month, 4 days in the second month, 6 days in the third month, and you're noticing absences for any reason so that you can then reach out and engage with families and figure out how to bring them back into school before they've missed so much time that they're academically at risk. Next slide. And I would also offer that as we've, COVID has really made it very challenging to know what school is. School takes lots of different forms: remote, in-person, hybrid, and families are moving around to be able to manage these things. It's increased a need for us to look at more data to make sure we're staying. Now, notice that in this graphic, it starts with positive relationships. And that's because when kids are in relationships to someone at a school site, you know you can stay in contact with them. But right now, we need to make sure we always have working contact and enrollment information. By the way, we found that schools who were better at staying in contact with families, noticing absences throughout the pandemic, have been better at retaining kids as part of their enrollment. When you notice as soon as a kid is not in contact, that you reach out to them, and then you make sure you have accurate information for how to call them, how to write to them, how to email them. That's what allows you to stay in contact. And then as you have to shift sometimes unexpectedly back between learning modes, if you know they have connectivity and access, it further enhances your ability. And then we have to be able to make sure that we notice when kids are able to show up in person. And we notice if they have to shift to distance learning, if we're losing them in distant learning, because the reasons for absences in those different contexts can be different. When you have all of this in place, that's what, under our current challenging COVID conditions, allows us to know that we have increased opportunities to learn. Next slide. And I want to share with you a little bit of data, a little bit of ways of thinking about this. One is that what we know is that chronic absence is a sign that positive conditions for learning are missing in whatever mode it is. Kids show up to school when families feel physically and emotionally healthy and safe, when they feel a sense of belonging, connection, support, when they feel academic challenge and engagement, and when they're surrounded by adults and peers who can support that. And the relationships, again, are essential to all of this. And when you see a child missing school, it can mean one or more of these conditions aren't in place. When it's a large group of kids, large numbers of kids in a school, it means one or more of these conditions aren't in place, and we need to put them in place. And I will say, as we are trying to move kids back into in-person schooling, in the midst still of a pandemic, if kids don't show up to school, that can both mean that they're not belonging, feeling that sense of belonging, connection, but it could also very well mean that they don't feel that sense of emotional, physical safety. And having relationships is what allows us to know what's going on and figure out what needs to be in place to assure families that they can return to school. Next slide. And for us, this is really putting in place a multi-tiered system of support. What we had seen in Missouri law before, because you've had a 90-90 law, schools were required for accreditation to notice when kids, make sure that 90% of their kids are showing them up 90% of the time. You also have fun based on average daily attendance. So it is true that Missouri's paid some attention to attendance. The challenge is that what we saw is that a lot of the triggers were when kids missed already 20% or more of school. And a lot of times people didn't notice it till the end of the school year when it's late to take action. By putting in place a tiered support system, you make sure you're engaging in prevention, early intervention, and you're not waiting. And that was, for example, in Hickman Mills, key to shifting and making sure kids could be in place. We did also add this foundational whole school support concept as a result of COVID. And if you go to the next slide, let me say a little bit what I mean by this. Foundational whole school supports are the solid relationship building foundation that isn't necessarily about attendance, but when it's not in place, kids don't show up. And what we saw last year, schools, I mean, no one predicted this pandemic. People were trying their best, but even with that, things got lost as they tried to figure out how to put stuff in place, how to put stuff between schools opening and closing, between going to remote. And so things like enrichment, which is what helps kids come to school. Sometimes people only had them in person and didn't figure out how to make them virtually or how to make sure they're done safely. Or a published schedule of classes. You know, kids can't show up unless they know where they're supposed to show up and how they're supposed to show up. That has been a challenge. Support for learning to facilitate learning at home. That's always been important. But now when we are more reliant on families than ever before to help make sure that when kids show up, when they're sick, they can't, or there's a COVID quarantine, maybe they're able to learn, but they can't show up to school. You have to have families have access to information about how they can show up to school. Having these foundations are in place. And when you see large numbers of kids not showing up to school, and that is what we've been seeing. We've been seeing incredible increases in chronic absence throughout the country, especially in communities hard hit by the pandemic. It means that you may have to return to looking at the foundation and making sure that as we open up school again, that all of these foundations are actively in place. Next slide. If you can click through this, sorry, these are animated. What we know is that kids and families come to school when they feel hope for a better future. Faith that the school that they are in is going to get them to that better future. A voice. We need voice because we don't know what happened to people during this pandemic. We need them helping to shape what are our strategies, what are our solutions, and our understanding of the challenges, and then access to resources. When we put this in place for kids and families, and that's what that foundation is about doing, we can get kids to school. Next slide. And I want to say that effective messaging, especially as we open up for school this fall, is going to be important. But keep in mind, effective messaging is straightforward, skimmable, relevant, personalized. And one of the things you can think about as part of your campaigns is how do you anticipate what is the information families are going to need to know about, and how do you communicate it in the easiest possible way? Next slide. We've been reflecting that we really think there are some key topics for you all to think about how to address. And this might be where, when you have a region, as a community, as a district, you might think about some, your template messages that people can take and tailor. But people are going to need to know, what are their learning options? What are the schedules? How are they supposed to show up to class? They're going to need to know what's in place to keep my kid healthy and safe when they show up to school in person, or even if you're still allowing for remote options, how do I make sure that's a healthy, safe place for me? Sometimes folks are going to still, if you're going to do remote options, might have to create learning hubs because home isn't a place where they can get on. And again, how do you keep those healthy and safe? How do you ensure a warm welcome? So kids, after all this challenging time, feel someone notices them, sees them, hears them, and wants them to be there. And how do you make sure that you convey your attendance expectations and help kids know what they're going to be learning in school every day over the course of the semester? Because They need to know that what they're coming to school for is valuable and will help them achieve their hopes and their dreams. So just think about, here's key things kids and families need to know about. And as you open the school year, you're going to have to make sure you have communications supporting not just attendance, but these learning options, these health and safety, that warm welcome. Next slide. We also wanted to suggest that there are some tools we have on our website that you can easily take and tailor. Again, borrow where you can, don't reinvent. We have these student success plans. Part of it starts with families thinking about who's their help bank. That can either be, if it's virtual, who to help get online. If it's in person, who helped you get to school? You know, I know transportation systems have been really hard hit. We may have to think about all our informal strategies. How do you create a help bank so that we have our everyday helpers, our occasional helpers, our potential helpers if something comes up? How do we make up those backup plans? How do we set goals? We're going to have this up, and it will have a revised school calendar so families can also track how many days their kids are actually missing and set their own goals for how they want to keep kids showing up to school. This is a type of material that is also can be taken, and you can add your own school's logos. This is an easy to use material that you make available for all families as part of your foundational and, well, actually that's, I would call this your universal prevention supports that. And then you can also make sure that if families have challenges later, you bring it back out and see how you can support, enhance folks' help bank. Next slide. We also have all sorts of new materials that we're making available. We're also continuing to revise them and help think about this. And then I want to make sure that you know about our 2021 attendance awareness campaign. All of this is great. Local resources, great. And if any of our national resources can be helpful to you, we want them to be useful to you. These are all free on our website and available. It's our giveaway strategy. Next slide. So our national attendance awareness campaign, which is about rebounding with attendance, how we rebound from COVID with a focus on attendance. Next slide. This is a campaign where we're expanding public awareness about the connection between attendance and engagement and the need to expand our investments in those things that provide an equal opportunity to learn. So where you have higher levels of chronic absence, we want you to invest greater resources. And how you can use your data. How many kids show up even just for this first day of school? And if they don't show up, it means that we have to invest more deeply in making sure kids can show up. We can use this information that we collect every day for continuous improvement. And we can look at which are the populations most affected, so we can tailor and target those resources, whether they're kids in public housing, whether they're kids who maybe speak languages other than English, whether they're kids who've been in marginalized communities who face serious discrimination in the past and need extra outreach to see that school is going to be a safe place for them. Next slide. This is also about deepening the understanding that positive conditions for learning matter and that a whole array of stakeholders is needed. And we will have to pay attention to physical and mental health, not just what happens academically, because it's a whole child who's coming to school. Next slide. We have social media resources. You can also engage stakeholders by having a sample proclamation. That's an easy stakeholder involvement. You can sign up for our updates and you'll get resources automatically. Next slide. And we have these key messages. Chronic absence reflects and contributes to educational inequity. The building of strong, trusting relationships that promote a feeling of belonging is fundamental to student engagement and attendance. When students are safe and connected and supported, they're more likely to show up to school. These are messages you can send your community so you can be all on the same page. Next slide. A positive problem-solving approach is what will improve attendance. I just want to really emphasize this. You know, chronic absence, we know this before COVID, is higher when kids have experienced trauma, and adverse childhood experiences. When that happens, the worst thing is to say to a kid, "What's wrong with you?" The most important thing to say to a kid and family is, "What happened and how can I help you?" You can use legal solutions, and I noticed we had folks from the courts in the audience today, but that's a last resort. What's really critical, especially given the huge numbers of kids that we're seeing chronically absent, is that we take a trauma-informed approach where we find out from families, what are the challenges and barriers? How do we help them support addressing them? And how do we make sure that we keep kids as healthy as possible during this next school year? Next slide. We actually also have a Pathways to Engagement toolkit that you can download. It talks about creating a team, using your identity, your data to identify priority groups, crafting engagement strategies, and then always taking a moment to reflect, learn, and improve. We started this last spring with getting people to think about how they nurture belonging in school. We've continued in the summer to encourage people to build bridges to school. And now we're at the fall talking about creating community at school. Next slide. And as part of this creating community at school, we're really emphasizing the need to focus on social and emotional wellness, reestablishing those routines and rituals of showing up to school every day, building a sense of community among kids and families who haven't seen each other for like a year and a half in some cases, building programming and partnerships that expand the capacity of schools to make sure that school can address physical, behavioral, mental health, and wellness, and creating those infrastructure, those relationships, advisories, mentoring, ambassadors, buddy systems. This can both be in person, but it can also be virtual. Even if you're in person, you can make sure it operates virtual. We've learned all sorts of ways to connect to people virtually, and we shouldn't throw out some of the techniques and strategies that we've learned through COVID about connecting to kids and families, because those connections can help us stay connected regardless of what happens around health conditions in our communities. So we really encourage you to create community at school and think about using the next 2 months to deeply invest in creating a strong community at school, because what we do know is that when kids show up the first month of school, they're more likely to show up to school for the remainder of the year. And we have actually seen this data not only from pre-COVID, but we actually have data from Connecticut that shows missing school during the first couple months during COVID, whether it was distance, hybrid, or in person, was predictive of worse attendance later in the school year. This is the moment to lay the foundation. So thank you so much. And Kristen, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you,
Oh,
Hedy.
wait, last thing, I forgot to
Go
say
ahead.
this.
Go ahead.
We actually have webinars. A couple of these are recorded. I'm sorry that webinar 3 is not today. That is August 4th. I should have taken that off. So next week, please show up for that webinar, and we would love for you to join us. And these are our free ways for you to be inspired by folks across the country. Our webinar on August 4th will have an amazing Reverend Larry Simmons from Detroit. We'll have Abe Fernandez talking about work that they've done by the Children's Aid Society. And we're going to have Eric Gordon, who is the superintendent of the CEO of the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, talking about their strategies. And I'll be joined by Kwesi Rollins, who is with the Institute for Educational Leadership and just such a leader around community schools and family engagement. And so we hope you will join us, and we really are excited to make sure that folks can benefit from what we have. And when we do our webinars, you can always consider creating a webinar party where you have folks from your own local community watch it together, and then find time to debrief and talk about what of the strategies heard about can actually be used in your own communities.
That's a wonderful idea. Thank you so much. It's really exciting to hear what you're doing and how generously you are sharing so many valuable resources with so many schools and communities with great needs. I was excited to listen as you talked repeatedly throughout your conversation about the focal point of relationships in schools. And the current, I think it's always been important, but the enhanced importance of focusing on children's mental health as we move forward from last year's experiences. And I'm curious if you can share some ideas with us about what the community can do, what teachers, parents, those of us in the community can do to really sort of temper the messaging that's going on in the media right now around a lost year, learning lost, children are behind, really powerful negative language that children are likely to misunderstand or internalize in a personal way. How can we take action and be called into action because of that important information without it negatively impacting the children that are also hearing it?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Kristen. And I would also open up if Tricia or Ella have any suggestions and ideas on this. I always think it's so important for us to take an asset-based approach. And while I think this has been an extraordinary year, and in fact, some kids may have lost out on opportunities to gain certain kinds of skills. On the other hand, they've learned other things too. You see kids learning resiliency in terms of, or how do they support, like I keep thinking about what I'm seeing, for example, among high school kids is high school kids taking on many extra family responsibilities. They're helping care for their siblings, they're helping care for adults. Some of them are working. Now, that is challenging, and it might mean that for a while they lost out some on, let's say, a core class that they were supposed to taking because they were in a job. What I would want to focus on is, boy, kudos to you for taking on that responsibility. And you've probably now learned how to balance work, and that's not a small skill. On the other hand, we also have to figure out, okay, you didn't pass algebra 2. I don't know what it was, how do we create some space for you to do that while also recognizing and emphasizing the things that someone did bring to that? I think we have to always come in with, what did you learn? What did you gain? What did you, accomplish in this? But then not failing to also recognize where maybe more work or intensive support is needed in order to get a kid, quote, on track in the way that traditional school might recognize that. But we have to have those honest assessments. And I think families, but a child who learns the ability to keep up with, and maybe you find the one class, for example, that the child did do well in. What was that? What did they learn from that? What were the study skills they gained from that? It's when we can help people draw from their strengths to then address where they still face challenges that I think people can move forward. And when we can connect folks in meaningful relationships to other folks, because I do think people can feel overwhelmed and helpless. You start to feel like, oh my God, there's been so many challenges, but how can we make sure that families can find those connections, talk with each other, and really reflect on the strengths that they did bring to them, to this world and to this challenging time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think that also becomes reflected in the conversation that Tricia brought up in terms of really helping students recognize that they play a valuable role in the community that they're part of at school, that they've gone through this challenging time along with their peers, and that those are bonding experiences in some way, that they will all share that time, forever, and being able to look back and say, I was the one that helped my teacher figure out what was going wrong with the Zoom. And I was in second grade.
And
all kinds of
seriously,
skills.
so this is another thing that I saw, like high school kids or middle school kids who helped. They can even continue to do that.
Yes.
We can also use some of our relief dollars to pay youth workers. They're trying to make income. How do we draw and recognize upon those strengths and invest in them? I think it's really an opportunity. I also think more and more opportunities for families to compare notes about what strategies they use to keep their kids, we benefit so much. And we might still want to do that virtually, not just in person, because sometimes it's easier for families working multiple jobs to hang out on a Zoom call than it is in person, even when we're back to doing in-person things, just because I don't have to have another 45-minute commute to get there and to get home.
Right.
And so I think we need to be creative about how do we create support networks among students, among families, and also utilize the strengths that students and families have with our teachers.
I love that. Thank you so much. We have a couple of minutes left. I don't want to dominate the conversation. If there are questions or ideas that others would like to share, at this point, if you're an attendee, please feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question that you would like to bring forward, or type it into the Q&A if that's more comfortable. If not, then I want to take a minute. Go ahead, Lisa.
In St. Louis, we don't have the robust attendance campaign overall arching. Our schools do a good job within the school buildings. What would you suggest for step 1 and step 2, now that we have a grade level reading chapter here in St. Louis? We have 30 school districts in St. Louis City and County. Where do we start so that we're not burdening our superintendents? Love your suggestions.
Yeah, and I would love if maybe Mike, Trish, and Elle might unmute too and show themselves, and they may also have some thoughts here. What I remember, Trish, and well, this Mike was actually more a part of this, but this is before Trish started. We started with creating a forum in Kansas City, where we actually, so one of the things I would, it was a chance to bring together, I actually came out and did a keynote. The United Way helped to analyze the data and say, this is the challenge, because you have to have something to say what's the scale and scope. But the other thing that, and I am going to suspect this is true, there are bright spots in St. Louis.
Of course.
There are bright spot schools. So, and Mike, maybe you can offer about this, because you were really instrumental and connected with several different local partners to put together an initial forum that called attention to the issue.
Yeah, we the United Way was a big part of it, because they have such a big convening power, and luckily also they had sort of made the decision to include school attendance as a funding priority, which I think helped as well. But we spent about a year working with meeting regularly kind of with school charter school leaders, school district administrators, and others, talking about school attendance and working on a basically kind of a study, as you mentioned, Hedy, which analyzed a lot of the local data and created a report. And so then we invited we had a few hundred mostly school administrators come to a conference, and it was a day-long conference. Hedy came out, gave the keynote address, and then at the end of that conference, we spent some time going through individual school data and starting to work on essentially an intervention plan. And so that's what really led to then working more intensely with some school districts on a school attendance team program and a public awareness campaign, a whole host of different strategies. But I think the real key was a big splashy conference to get it started. And then that created a lot of the excitement, and we had the data ready so that we could really get a lot of people motivated to start trying to work on a specific goal, which was reducing the chronic absence rate. We had a very specific number in mind. And so that I guess that would be my recommendation, is try to find a really strong convening partner to work with, and then host that type of conference armed with the data. And that after that, it kind of starts to roll.
And Lisa, I can't help but, okay, so I was a faculty brat with my dad at WashU. I have to say, WashU is an incredible resource. I can't imagine you can't go to WashU and find someone who can help you do a local attendance analysis.
I think I know the person too.
So you think about your resources. You do have an incredible, vibrant United Way in the St. Louis area. I think you could even have a couple people maybe talk with the folks who help to start and launch stuff. The only other thing I would say is, this is a couple years. You go in not thinking, oh, I'm going to do 1 year and then we're going to be, I mean, this is what, 4 years into this now, Mike? And you have to think you're building the buy-in, awareness, and will to act over a period of time. So once you get everyone, you are looking for a couple districts that'll be leader districts that will sort of take it more, and then you're expanding more. But I think you start with doable targets, and you think about this as a 3 to 5 year plan.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring webinar today. Everything, all the work you're doing nationally and in Kansas City. Thank you, Kristen.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you, Lisa, for setting up all of the components of the 2 webinars today. And thanks to Tricia and Elle and Mike, of course, and especially to Hedy for joining us here in Missouri today. And best to everyone. I hope you enjoy the other opportunities at the national conference this week. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.